Now we're gonna get started with our show. We have our beautiful guest today, Tasneem Rajan. She's Executive Director for Daya, Houston. And we have Gayatri Joshi, Advocacy Manager. We're so excited to have you all today, though the topic is a little delicate, right? We will be talking about Child Abuse and Sexual Awareness Month this April. So I have been seeing blue ribbons everywhere. It's outside any schools that you go around. It's like tied on the trees and stuff. And I was wondering what it was. So what does the blue stand for?
Yeah, so blue is specifically for awareness around child abuse.
Okay.
And so you'll see that kind of in the community out and about this month. And it's really to kind of bring awareness around like one of the very many like taboo topics kind of.
Yes, and not spoken much about, right? Because I think we all like to live in a society where we don't believe that things like these happen. Right?
Absolutely.
So can you tell us a bit about why awareness around both topics is so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think in most communities, especially ours, abuse in general isn't a topic that we address or talk about much. And so, you know, definitely in the community and statewide, nationally, there's a big push these months to kind of bring awareness around those topics so people are aware that abuse is happening in different situations, and then really what you can do to help if you find a victim in those scenarios. Yeah.
Okay. So what is domestic violence and what is child abuse? Are they correlated?
Yeah. So domestic violence typically happens, you know, to adult victims. There's also family violence. And so at Daya, we kind of see both. So with domestic violence, we're typically talking about like intimate partner relationships.
Okay.
So either, you know, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or, you know, just two partners together, marriages, things like that. But then family violence also includes, especially in our communities, you know, you have like multiple people living in households, like family members, and so it could be like in-law abuse and other members of the household that are kind of perpetrating the abuse. And so with family violence, you'll see different kinds, like physical, psychological, emotional, verbal, financial, spiritual, harassment, stalking, those types of things, and that's typically one adult partner to another. With child abuse, there's similar types of abuse. I think statewide there's 4 different kinds, and it's typically like physical, also maltreatment, medical, psychological, and the kind of neglect in general. So not providing certain things medically or physically, and then of course sexual abuse as well. And so those types of abuse are pretty similar in both types of violence, but obviously the main difference is that you're working with children with child abuse, like those under 18. But there is actually like a huge correlation between the two, where the majority of households where you'll see family violence are more likely, like 30 to 60% of households that face family violence, there's also children in the home that are facing child abuse. And so there is that huge correlation where the two coexist, unfortunately.
So what are the effects of child abuse and domestic violence on children?
There are quite a lot.
There are plenty. You know, when it comes to domestic violence, when children, you know, oftentimes they say that children see what they do and hear, right? So when it comes to abuse, it's actually like a learned behavior. It's normalized within the families, and so it's very important to actually like talk about, you know, appropriate ways to, you know, keep respect, placing boundaries, and that could even involve something as small as you know, telling your child, like, or asking your child, to letting them know, like, they have a say in this, whether, for instance, like, you know, when you meet family members or friends, you go to an event, you know, oftentimes you want to hug the child, you want to, like, or maybe kiss them on the cheek or something, because they're so, but, like, teaching children, like, you know, if you're not comfortable with this, like, you can say, I'm not comfortable with this, right? Maybe a handshake will do. And culturally, it may seem a little disrespectful, but it setting boundaries and showing yourself respect and others respect starts at a very, very young age.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about like exposure to any type of violence, whether it's child abuse or domestic violence, we know that the kids living in homes that are experiencing it, they then also have like physical outcomes like poor mental health outcomes, things like anxiety, depression, PTSD. Those are all witnessed by kids living in those homes. And then, children may act out being aggressive or also like really isolated. There's a slew of like mental health problems, including depression and anxiety, low self-esteem, aggression and anger, societal withdrawal, and then even like difficulty concentrating in school and sleeping. And then with physical health, there's things like chronic health problems, sometimes substance abuse. And then in school, there's a lot of delinquency and criminal behavior. And as Gayatri was saying, like then there's acting out that aggression towards other kids in the terms of bullying and things like that. And so we know that the kids that are witnessing this, they don't know how to process it and normalize it. And so all those things are things that they then carry on into later childhood or even adulthood.
Right.
You'll see I would say when an incident as such occurs, and this doesn't have to be something where like they have to be physically touched. It could also be exposure of like pornography or something like that, right? And so you'll see a significant change in a child when it comes to such an incident. And so an experience and what happens is you want to look at the signs. Someone who once maybe loved to dance or play sports, right? Like some kind of a withdrawal. Maybe they're still going, but there's not that enthusiasm, that excitement.
Yeah.
And so it's very important to keep in mind, someone who becomes a little reserved or all of a sudden grades are dropping in school, like acting out. The principal's probably calling often or the teachers. And so these are some things to keep in mind when it comes to children.
Yeah.
And then maybe slowly having conversations or bringing it up in settings where like you can probably like bond with them. I know Bollywood movies and music are one example that you can use. And so because you don't want to be too out forward too, it can also make the child uncomfortable if they're not ready to talk about it.
But I'm just thinking about the kids who are in the houses where violence is happening. Like, how do they end up dealing with it? Like, do the school systems have ways to see that the child is going through it and, go to a counselor or something?
Yeah, so at Daya and at every school district, teachers are like taught about the signs of abuse, and they're mandatory reporters, as are we. So they are really educated on the different, withdrawal signs or things like that, so that they're able to identify and then typically call the state and report, like within a certain time frame. I think it's 24 hours to 48 hours. They're required by law to then report the child abuse. So then skilled investigators can kind of go in there and understand what is happening in the home, and then if services are initiated by the state, then the children will receive services like counseling or separating them from the abusive parent, and putting them with the safe parent and things like that. A lot of education and awareness comes in that way on the harms that we're doing to the kids in these homes.
Okay, that's good to know. So can you tell us about the intergenerational cycles of violence?
Yeah. So, as Gayatri was saying, like when you grow up in a home and you see these behaviors and you don't know how to process them, then one of two things typically happens. You could either go on to be a victim yourself or an abuser, and so you see this playing out in childhood as like bullying or aggression towards other kids. But then as the child ages, you'll see that like in teen dating violence relationships, where children will, or teens at that point will accept behaviors because they see that their parents accepting it, or they could go on to be violent or aggressive themselves. And so in that way, like, that cycle carries from generation to generation because there's no kind of inputs or education or awareness or interventions that really stop the cycle. And then when we look at the intergenerational cycle of violence, it also means like kind of that trauma that spans generations. Like, your grandmother has gone through some sort of sexual assault or violence, and then it's almost like this, almost within your genes, where it's like you're kind of passing that down the generations until somehow there's an intervention that stops that from continuing down generations.
Yeah, it's just like it's like patterns that just continue because there's no self-awareness, and before self-awareness, it's also the knowledge, right? Being able to name, like, what may have happened, like, growing up, like, if something happened to your dad or to your mom, and there was no one there to kind of help you articulate what that was. Because oftentimes, even though, you hear a lot, like, parents are arguing or family members are arguing, and then you may tell the child, okay, we'll go in your room, right? Yeah. But they can still hear that, and they can still feel that, and it's very important to recognize that, because that instills fear in the long run, right? Or it can also, like Tasneem said, the aggression increases, the resentment and all of that kicks in. Some children have a tendency of, like, if wanting to protect, right, a parent, and then as they get older, you still see that protective personality, in different situations, and, whether it's intimate partner, friendships, or in other settings.
Yeah, and as Gayatri said, like, that, even I've noticed, so I used to work at Child Protective Services many years ago and in foster care with kids, and I would see even babies, like, you wouldn't think that they absorb it, but even, like, inner utero, like, that level of stress on a mom when she's pregnant. And by the way, like, in domestic violence, pregnancy is one of the most dangerous times for a victim. Abuse tends to go up. So, the thoughts of the mom also pass on to the kid, and you'll see things like child development delays and all sorts of developmental problems early in childhood. And as Gayatri said, even when there's fighting in the home, even if the kids can't hear the exact conversations, they're absorbing it, they're feeling it, and they're kind of integrating it into their own systems, and it plays out in so many ways through the span of their lifetime.
So when you said dangerous, it's because they're absorbing everything, even though oh my God, you don't even realize that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So what is sexual assault?
Yeah.
So sexual assault is, it includes, it's basically like a non-consensual touching or having someone else touch you, the pressure, coerce, force, and, like, that includes rape and child molestation. Yeah, every 68 seconds someone is sexually assaulted. Every 68 seconds. Yeah, and it blows your mind when I'm, like, saying it out loud, but, and the thing is, like, 8 out of the 10 times, unfortunately, the perpetrator, the abuser, would be someone that they know, right? It could be a family, friend, neighbor, and that wouldn't come into mind, in the beginning, because this person is someone that's supposed to care for you, protect you, but unfortunately, it is someone that you know.
Yeah, and for us in the world of domestic violence, we deal with, like, intimate partner sexual abuse, and in our community, that a lot of times with our dynamics, we just think with marriage, that's, sex is implied, like, that's a duty, but consent, which we'll talk about in a second, is definitely needed every time. But when we talk specifically about sexual assault awareness, as Gayatri said, like, that's not necessarily between intimate partners. It could be, a stranger assault. But typically what happens is it's someone that that you may not be in a relationship with, but you're aware of each other. the kind of stranger danger, it's real, but it's typically like within circles of people that you know somehow.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is consent? Does it apply in a marriage?
Consent. So consent is obviously like you're giving someone permission, right?
Yeah.
Can I hug you? Can I hold your hand? And so forth. And so when there's no consent, means no, basically,
Yeah.
right? And even if someone is unable to respond or didn't respond, that doesn't give you permission to do anything, right? To
Right.
touch this person, to even attempt, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very important to, also like teach consent at an early age, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts with like being able to teach a child like correct body part names, right? Where's chest, your hand, so that they're able to also articulate if something happened to them, right? And the other thing is like once again letting them decide whether they want a hug or a kiss, or and modeling and showing them, and letting them know when to say no, and it's okay to say no, or it's okay to say stop, especially when children are playing, like sometimes you take them to the playground and they're just playing around with kids, and it's important, like if someone is pushing and then they're not able to say no or stop, this would be a learning moment at that point as well.
Yeah, and as Gayatri said that, like we sometimes think, oh, is it the right time to have that conversation with a child? But I think by the time they're verbal, it definitely is, because, what will happen, especially in our community, is like kids in general, like Gayatri said, don't have many boundaries, right? And then when we have a culture where, I know growing up, it's like, oh, here's your auntie and uncle, go say hello, go give them a hug, go give them a kiss. And that's so normalized, and there's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, it's like, it's such a contradictory message of I have empowerment over my body and I can say no, but then this is a person that I'm told to, trust. And we know that the majority of like sexual abuse for child abuse occurs definitely within the family. It's older family members, it's cousins, it's friends of family that are in and around these children. And so empowering them in that way, like with my nieces working at CPS, like I started having those conversations very early on about, as Gayatri said, the reason that you want to teach them the proper names of those body parts is that if something happens, they want to be able to vocalize it both to their abuser, like, do not touch me here, things like that empowerment. And so then they understand that, they're also, I think with kids especially, and any victim, like you're going to internalize an outward behavior and blame yourself. And so this kind of gives children or adults in these situations empowerment over their own bodies to understand that they can say no, that consent is a thing.
Okay. Yeah, because growing up, like I was brought up in India, so this is not even a conversation you're having, right?
Yeah.
Like where you have control of your body, like you're not even taught that, like as a woman, it was never a part. In school we learned about sex, I think, but that was it. And that, because I was in a convent school, it's very minimal, like so it is just amazing now that the kids are growing up here, and not just here, anywhere in the country. I think it is so important to have these conversations where they know that it's their body. And I love the way you said it, it's up to them, right? Whether who they want to hug or who they want to shake their hand with. It's so important.
We've kind of stopped forcing that on our younger, like, family members. So
and
that,
especially the culture that we come from, like, that auntie is gonna feel bad. So be it, right? Like, we need to understand that we are responsible and protect our kids, because they have their lives ahead, and maybe have the conversations with the older people or senior people. My kid always reminds me with the senior people in our house. Right?
And I know what you're saying, because it's such a cultural norm, right, to do that, like when you're amongst family. But even like me as my niece's aunt, like at a certain age, we're just starting to ask them, like, is it okay that I give you a hug or a kiss? And then sometimes they're going to say no, and it's okay. Like, so we give alternatives like, oh, do you want to shake their hand, or do you want to, give them a high five or something like that, where they are still having some sort of, cultural like norms here with like family and togetherness and stuff, but still feel empowered over their ability to say yes or no to anything.
Absolutely, and it starts so young, right? These conversations start really young.
Yeah.
So, what services does Daya offer for their clients?
So we offer plenty of services, starting with case management. We offer counseling, legal support, crisis intervention, and safety planning. And all these services are offered in like the preferred languages of the client, so Hindi, Urdu, and we have over how many languages? I think
15. I think that we
And so we really try to meet the clients where they're at. Even if someone calls our helpline and they may not be ready for the next step, but they just called for education, that's the first step, is just calling in, learning about what the terminology is, or maybe just like, I don't know what to do from here, what are my rights, what are my options. And so this is where we come in, and also supporting with like filing a police report or accompanying them in court. We also support clients in this manner.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't even know that was it. What's the difference between like case management and then like counseling and other services?
So case management goes into basically more of like I would say like your everyday steps, like helping them apply for child support, and safety planning kind of comes into that, right? So safety planning is like where we're creating a plan on what measures to take to be safe, what steps can be taken, right? Whether that's like having a bag packed ready, or who you can call if you're ready, or even if there's a crisis or an emergency, right? So those kinds of
and then counseling is just like, so they're not committing to anything, they just call you and they just want support, so that's when you're talking to them.
So that there's emotional support, which is provided, all the advocates, we provide emotional support, but counseling goes a little in depth, right? It's talk therapy, so you're having conversations with a professional who's helping you process and explore, and like what a client goes through after a traumatic experience, and helping them break those down into pieces, because sometimes it could be a blur, sometimes it's like your mind puts it in a place and you can't think about it, or you're not ready to think about it, and so this person is just helping you in hands with just processing all of that to get to a point where you can once again lead a healthy healed life again.
Like our services are all holistic, so safety planning, we
need to take a break so we can get on this conversation right after the break.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Welcome back to Chai Time on 103.5 Hum FM. We are with our guests Tasneem and Gayatri from Daya, Houston, and we were talking about the holistic services you offer, Tasneem.
So our services are primarily for adult victims of domestic and family violence, and so the first kind of point of service when you call into our helpline really is trying to assess the situation with any caller. And so safety planning, as Gayatri said, is really just kind of assessing, like, are you currently in the relationship? Are you in a dangerous place? Really just trying to assess, like, what the level of danger could be. And then, safety planning occurs pretty much every conversation an advocate has with their client. Okay, you're living in the home with your abuser advisor, how do we keep you safe if violence occurs, like running to certain parts of the house, keeping a bag packed, keeping numbers memorized, and then when you're getting ready to leave a relationship, what does that planning look like? Are you going to go to a family member's house? Are you putting them in danger? Should you consider a shelter? Again, packing like important documents, legal things that you'll need over time. And then safety planning can also occur like after you've left. So when you're co-parenting together, how do you continue to see each other in a court setting or for those custody arrangements and still stay safe? So we kind of offer that through case management at like every point in someone's journey. So the way I see case management with an advocate is really kind of mapping out different areas of goals you have for your situation. Okay. So, for example, if I want to leave a relationship, what is my goal in terms of housing? What is my goal in terms of employment, transportation, childcare? And then if you're seeking that divorce and that protective order, then there's legal goals. There may be immigration-related goals. If most of our I would say the majority of our clients come here on some sort of dependent status, right, to their spouse. So they're here legally, but in seeking separation, they may have to seek independent legal status for themselves. And so we kind of help them navigate all potential like plans in different areas of their lives and build those goals towards that. And then we come in with like resources and help with financial assistance. So we offer, we know a lot of times that shelters aren't our go-to for our community. They want to be in their own independent space. And so we help them get somewhere short-term and then long-term into apartments where we provide rent and utility assistance and, starter kits for furniture and groceries and getting them set up in that way. We also then, when they're initiating like a protective order, we'll go with them to the district attorney's office when they're going through a divorce, which is such a difficult process. Then counseling comes in as well, where emotionally, psychologically, you're going through this whole journey where we're there to support. And as Gayatri said, then it's like a licensed professional that we have on staff. For kids, we don't currently have kids services, but it's something that we are aiming to get over time. But currently, when we identify those situations, then we have counselors that we partner with at community partner orgs that then sign a release with our parents, so we can continue to be like that cultural piece where the kids are still getting like the services outside of Daya.
That's a whole lot of services.
And that's not even like, so when it comes to like financial literacy or economic empowerment, like a lot of our individuals are highly skilled back home in India but may not have like a degree that's relatable here, so we help them even with financially go get certifications, or how do you open up a bank account, how do you set up credit in this country, and that's where the culturally specific services, the language, the linguistically culturally specific services are really, really beneficial. In a mainstream agency, they're not going to understand your language, your culture, the fact that, our relationships are built on staying together regardless of the situation. And so we understand all those complexities. We can speak with them in their languages. And so that really helps build that trust over time.
And then what are the barriers that South Asians face?
Some of the things I just mentioned, like, language, or
that's the main
language is a huge thing, right? So even if you speak English, it's not necessarily, the language that you're comfortable in. And so that's why we have like advocates that speak multiple languages. And then just lack of awareness of the laws and the legal system here. That's a huge thing, right? They change so frequently, so lack of kind of trust for authority figures going forward, calling law enforcement. There's even the piece where law enforcement doesn't necessarily understand the culture, and so a lot of what we do is we educate in the mainstream community too. We partner with local PDs, attorneys, things like that, where we can help bridge that cultural gap and explain, like, well, you may be seeing this, and it's not that she's hesitant or not being cooperative, but this may be the dynamic at play. Maybe she's not allowed to, in her home life, maybe she's not meant to speak to men alone in, a closed, confined area. And so just having that, like, educational piece for the law enforcement and authorities has kind of helped us help our clients navigate those systems.
That's amazing, because there are so many small parts, right?
Yeah.
Because we come from another country, language, immigration, all of that.
Yeah.
But y'all are there to put the pieces together and be there for that.
Yeah.
The aim is to empower them to be able to, they come in a crisis, and then the point is to help them reach a place where they can become financially independent, that they can start taking care of themselves and their children and family members. And so, like Tasneem said, when it comes to, like, financial, economic empowerment, we really try, if someone has never put a foot into the workforce, right? We really try to help them from, like, scratch of, like, creating a resume, holding workshops, and doing some one-on-one in terms of taking existing skills, transferable skills, and then how that can go into the workforce. Like someone who's making appointments for their children, very organized, and things like that, because this is their chance, and this is their moment, and and once you have everything else, all your other ducks in a row, like legal, and you stepped out of the home now, this is the next big, like, important part is the financial aspect of it.
And we don't ask someone that calls in to go one way or the other. We kind of meet them exactly where they are. If they want to stay in the relationship, then we just help them think through how to stay safe in that relationship. And typically, any victim will leave a relationship 7 times on average before they leave for good. So they'll kind of leave, and they'll have, these barriers and things like that. And so if and when one of our clients decides to make that decision, we just support them where they're at and offer them resources. And if they go back, then we want to be that helping hand, that we're there every time you go back and every time you then leave.
Yes, that's great. So what is the reporting process for child abuse and sexual assault cases?
So as I said, we are mandatory reporters. All school systems are mandatory reporters. So if we identify it, then we would call. There's a national hotline and statewide centers for child protective services nationally, and so we would call that number and we would make a report, and someone on the other line would kind of just gather the information. And from that point, a lot of times what happens is administratively those cases get closed without even investigating them, because they don't deem it as child abuse, or there's no identifiable information or things like that. But let's say that it is opened up for an investigation, then someone from the state would then look into, is abuse going on? They would. Now the good thing about reporting is it's confidential, and so that's something the community should know. Like, if you see this going on, anyone can call that line, and we encourage you to do so, because it's almost like we don't want to take the expertise in determining whether it is or not child abuse. So we err on the side of caution if we make these calls and know that the appropriate experts are going to go out there and assess the situation and make sure that it is actually abuse that is occurring. And then they have, similar to us, all sorts of interventions that they offer the family in those situations. And then for sexual assault, I'll let you speak to it.
For sexual assault, so when a victim is sexually assaulted, obviously making a police report would be one thing. A lot of times sexual assault, it goes under unreported or underreported, right? I think I read somewhere it was 63% is unreported cases of sexual assault. And so it's important to know that even though you may not be ready to file a police report, understand the criminal justice process here, especially like in Texas, is a whole nother education information, right? And so, that being said, like, someone can get a forensic exam done. So what this means is, like, it's called a SANE exam, a sexual assault nurse examiner. And so there's two parts to this. And so there's a medical portion of it where, like, you go in and they'll, they take photos of all the injuries, and they do STD testings, and they'll do, the photos, and they also make sure that there's, if you have any real injuries, like in terms of you've been hurt badly, also taking care of that. And then you have the second part, which is the interview, which is where you're sharing what actually happened, right? And it's like a recorded interview, and then after that, if you don't want law enforcement to get involved, that's your choice.
Okay.
But the point is that then this information is stored as evidence. So let's say later on you decide, maybe after 2-3 years, like, you know what, this person is still maybe harassing you, or maybe you feel empowered enough where you're like, I'm ready for this, right? Then they can go back and they can use that evidence, right? Yeah. So it's and this is very important. And so, in saying that, so when it comes to child abuse, there's no statutory limitations. So you can report it at any time. Okay. With adult sexual assault, rape, it's 10 years in Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, it may be different in other states, but in Texas it's 10 years.
Oh wow, that's still a long period.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then what are the myths and realities about reporting child abuse?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and like I said, my background started with Child Protective Services, and so the biggest myth was, if I call this number, I'm breaking up a family, and they're going to, keep us apart. But in Texas, almost over 90% of cases start with something called family reunification. And so even in the most severe sexual abuse cases we saw, the way it works is once the state comes in and starts an investigation, and let's say they decide to remove the child from the home to stabilize the situation, what happens is that there's a 1-year clock initiated on that case. And that means that even in the most severe cases, that the state has to provide services for the parents and in the hopes of reunifying the family.
Oh,
yeah. And so what will happen is they will be offered counseling and other sorts of services to kind of stabilize. And so that's the case for every situation. So what I always tell parents in these situations is, one, let's say there's domestic violence going on. The first thing that they will say to the victim parent is, they're not going to try to pull apart the kid if there's a protective parent there. Then they may ask you to go stay with a family member or shelter or a safe space. And so I always encourage parents, like, if this is going on, be cooperative and work with your case manager there to ensure that the child can be placed with you or a trusted family member while you guys are working services. And typically if there's a protective parent, then they are going to go with that protective parent. So, and even when they don't, like I said, the majority of cases, the state doesn't want to tear apart families. They just want to provide intervention and education so that the kids can be safe in those homes. And so I think that's the biggest myth, is that they tear apart families. But the way we look at it when it's on us is that child is a true victim, right? And we have to do our best to just ensure their safety is occurring.
Yeah. the information you shared, it's just amazing, right? For someone who is listening and like maybe going through something, just knowing that Daya is there, like every step of the way. I didn't even, and I mean, I've been doing this a while with y'all, but I didn't know the detail of the services that y'all have been providing. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, right? And then before we end the show, is there anything else you want to share? Because we're almost at time, but any like positive stories, or not stories, but incidents that have happened.
We've had so many clients over the years, but one that pops out in my mind is someone who went through like physical, sexual, emotional, it was like all of the abuses, and this person is now on the other side of it, and when I mean the other side of it, like the willpower in this individual was amazing, and basically she came from abroad. Went through a traumatic experience, and we're talking about there was legal support provided, criminal advocacy, counseling, case management, housing, and now this individual is working in their desired profession, and doing really great, and so, and that's just like one example. There's so many, oftentimes we even get clients that are doing so well that they want to come back and they want to support other clients.
Wow.
And there's so many more stories like that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, because that is so heartwarming, right? For just me and for listeners to know that there is hope on the other side and you can come through strong, right? Even though it's not an easy path, but if you make that decision, then there is help every step of the way.
Absolutely. And as Gayatri said, like we see about over 600 clients a year, but in an area where I would say there's over 150,000 South Asians, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men, and we provide services for both. And so we've had males come forward too, and we encourage that to occur because we know the stigma is so high there. But when you think about the numbers, we're just not seeing all of them, and we're not able to help all of them. And so we really want to spread awareness that these services exist, and the information we gave today, it's so much, and it's so difficult to even start to think like, where do I go with this? Where do I begin with this? And so, when you call, it's one of like many calls and support that you'll get. And we're super proud. I'm super proud that this year we're actually starting up. So as Gayatri, like she's wonderful, like hosting like client workshops, so it could be any, like we had a auto body mechanic, there like showing us how to do tire changes, life skills, like working with banks, budgeting, things like that. But we're also now starting therapeutic support groups. So we used to have just one-on-one counseling, but we're now doing weekly support groups. And so that group dynamic that we create and that our clients then tend to lean on one another and be mentors for each other, like that's such a beautiful thing that kind of comes out of this. And
sense of true community,
community and togetherness. And the heart and resilience of our clients is something that like daily inspires us to do what we do.
The work is really rewarding. You could have a tough day and then you get one phone call and one win, and that win is just
it's priceless.
So do you all have any upcoming events you want to share with us? So
we have a few in celebration of this is also AAN HPI Heritage Month, so like Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so we have an activity, an event, we're partnering with the Harry Justice Center and BPSOS and supporting these AAPI survivors of gender-based violence. And so we have lead artist Ruhi Maknojia, who is helping in the community. We are creating personalized kites that embody resilience and cultural pride. And so we'll be decorating those kites and then flying them. And so the event is called Together We Soar, and that is April 27th from 2 to 4 p.m. at Asia Society Texas Center. And then we also have one of probably our most favorite events through Daya called Brown Bodies, Bold Stories. That's Sunday, April 13th. And it's really like bringing together our community members, and it's kind of the spoken word. And so it's like poetry or just sharing stories and things like that. And these are all people in the community that have kind of just said, we want to talk. And it's not necessarily like stories of abuse or violence. It's just like art in verbal form. And so that will be occurring at Brazos Bookstore from 6:30 to 8 on Sunday, April 13th. And then finally, we have our annual fundraising gala, save the date, which will be out soon. But the event is Sunday, September 28th. It'll start around 5 o'clock, and that will be at the Sugarland Marriott this year. Oh, okay. And so that is your way, if you're a donor, a community supporter, this political climate right now, and our funding being majority, a large part, 50% of our budget comes from federal grants. And so as we navigate these kind of choppy waters, we ask the community to step up and kind of support a cause that is within the community, is South Asian. And so we would love for you guys to attend our gala, which again will be Sunday, September 28th. And what's really exciting this year is that we are doing a co-feature with a documentary film called Survivor Made. And it is a beautiful story of several clients that it's a partnering nonprofit that we work with, and they empower victims of violence to then go on and have living wage jobs. And they have a platform, an online platform called Gifted, where these victims have come together and created a marketplace. Oh. And so the documentary is featuring several Actually, the founder is South Asian. Okay. And so we've partnered with them to bring a movie screening a few days before. I believe it will be the Thursday before the gala. And our keynote will actually be a Filipino lady that is one of their heads of sales. Okay. And she is going to share her story with us, the culturally kind of significant piece of it. And then I'm excited to say we also have our own Daya client that will be speaking at the event and sharing her story and how she's kind of come out on the other side. And so it will be a really inspiring, heartfelt, close to our community event this year. And we are happy to have you guys join for that.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're looking forward to that gala. And thank you so much, ladies. This was not easy information to share, but there was a lot of stuff said, and I learned a lot today. So thank you for taking the time today. And yes.
Well, thank you for continuing to give us the platform to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, our listeners. We will see y'all next Monday, same time, same place, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.